Okay.
Quick question. Is it cool if I set a chair up like here so I can use it like as a podium on like our spare desk? I personally, I prefer to speak standing up, so.
Also, yeah, are we just gonna stand?
You're literally just gonna stand and say from where you're at. If you want to add something underneath it,
we can hold our computers, right, to like
yeah,
look at our information.
as long as you're just dead, not. As long as you're not like that.
Yeah.
And I can see eye contact.
What about the crossbars? We're just gonna stay where we are.
Crossbars, you can stand if you want to. Cool. I just ask that you be respectful.
We don't even have to stand?
Awesome.
Do we have to stand when giving our... Oh my god, I'm gonna sit, thank you.
It's preferred.
If you want to, you're more than
so much
welcome
better
to.
about that.
I just
sitting.
I hate speaking like this because then you have to like scroll and it's
No,
awkward.
I feel that.
Alright, let's. Okay. Who's affirmative, who's negative?
We're affirmative.
Affirmative.
Affirmative, no. Alright, nope, we lost a person on Zoom. Alright, I'm gonna have a timer. Isaiah's gonna have a timer. Do y'all need, are y'all gonna have any of your own personal timers?
We'll have timers.
Yeah, I'll probably time.
Okay,
Your honor.
y'all ready?
Yeah.
Alright, first speak up this. You ready, Isaiah?
Yep.
First speaker, you may begin.
We introducing ourselves? Alright, so first I want to set the resolution here that this House regrets the dominance of the fossil fuel economy. And then I'll begin. Fossil fuels seem to unlock the future when humans were first able to harvest and utilize them. It led to the Industrial Revolution and great progress globally. However, actions have consequences. Our over-reliance on fossil fuels has damaged the sustainability of our planet and created a multitude of ethical conflicts. For these reasons, we're proud to affirm that this House regrets the dominance of the fossil fuel economy. So first, I want to set some definitions for this resolution of ours. Regret, according to dictionary.com, is to feel sorrow or remorse towards something. Also, according to dictionary.com, dominance is to have control, authority, supreme rule over something. And according to American 2015, a fossil fuel economy is an economy of self-sustaining growth predicated on the growing consumption of fossil fuels and therefore generating a sustained growth in emissions of carbon dioxide. So for my first contention, I want to set a framework here for the word regret. As the affirmative, we want to make it abundantly clear from the start of this debate that it is a debate of value. The wording of the resolution is centered around the use of the word regret. Therefore, it is not a matter of proposing a plan or choosing a policy. This debate is about examining the effects of the dominance of the fossil fuel economy and the following outcomes. Additionally, while something can be beneficial and have positive effects, that doesn't negate all the negative effects that might come along with it. And it is normal to regret those effects. Therefore, this is a debate of a cost and benefits analysis of the effects, not uses, of fossil fuels. So for my second contention, I want to touch a bit on global warming. So currently, where do we stand globally with climate change and the effects of global warming? According to the World Resources Institute in February of this year, the newest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change paints a troubling picture. Climate change is already impacting every corner of the world, and much more severe impacts are in store if we fail to have greenhouse gas emissions this decade and immediately scale up adaptation. UN Secretary General called the report an atlas of human suffering and a damning indictment of failing climate leadership. Here are 6 takeaways from the report. 1. Climate impacts are already more widespread and severe than expected. 2. We are locked into even worse impacts from climate change in the near term. 3. Risks will escalate quickly with higher temperatures, often causing irreversible impacts of climate change. 4. Inequity, conflict, and development challenges heighten vulnerability to climate risks. 5. Adaptation is crucial. And 6. Some impacts of climate change are already too severe to adapt to. My next point is that scientists around the world are already leading major protests over global warming. According to McFall and Johnson in April 6th of this year, a NASA scientist and 3 others were arrested in LA after chaining themselves to the door of a Chase Bank office building. JP Morgan Chase & Co. has invested more money in fossil fuels than any other bank. The protesters were calling for the company to divest from coal, oil, and gas. Peter Colmes, who studies climate change at NASA, chained himself to the handle of the bank's glass doors, stating that we've been trying to warn you guys for so many decades that we're heading towards a catastrophe, and scientists of the world are being ignored, and it's got to stop. We're not joking, we're not lying, we're not exaggerating. Scientists are risking arrest in cities across the planet. The actions of Comus and his companions were part of more than a dozen protests staged in cities across the globe through a coalition called Scientist Rebellion, which is dedicated to scientists taking civil actions of disobedience to advocate for climate action. In Berlin, scientists glued their hands to the road to block a bridge. In London, some threw fake oil onto Shell's UK headquarters. In Sydney, 5 protesters were arrested after laying in the street to block traffic in pouring rain. In Washington, D.C., people chained themselves to the fence surrounding the White House. Climate activists are sometimes depicted as dangerous radicals, but the truly dangerous radicals are the countries that are increasing the production of fossil fuels. According to Comus again, it's now or never. This planet is everything, and it's time we start acting like it. My last point is that these protests are for good reason, because there is no escaping the impacts of climate change. It will affect everyone, everywhere, now. According to The Guardian in February of this year, climate breakdown is accelerating rapidly, with many of the impacts being more severe than predicted. Any further delay in global action will miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. Everywhere is affected, with no inhabited region escaping dire impacts from rising temperatures and increasingly extreme weather. About half the global population, about 3.3 to 3.6, okay.
Yeah.
Do you need a break? Breathe in.
Yeah.
Got this.
Hey, my name is Lily Holly. We negate the resolved. We, the House, regrets the dominance of the fossil fuel industry economy. We, the House, cannot regret the reliance and use of fossil fuels. No one here is debating their detrimental environmental impact. We can all recognize that fossil fuels are extremely harmful and we need to find ways to improve our environment. That said, to say we regret the overall dominance and use of fossil fuels would be naive, as it would be to say we regret the technology and present-day way we live life. Our first definition comes from Cambridge Dictionary. It defines regret as to feel sorry about a situation, especially something sad or wrong, or a mistake that you have made. When we consider the term regret as it's stated, that implies the historical context of fossil fuels. When establishing a basis for the possibility of regret, we must observe the benefits versus the cost of using fossil fuels. Our second definition comes from Webster's Dictionary, and it defines fossil fuels as a fuel such as coal, oil, or natural gas formed in the earth from plants or animal remains. Therefore, this argument will be examining the transitions between these subsets of fossil fuels underneath the umbrella terminology and how we as a society have used each individual fuel. Our last definition comes from Cambridge Dictionary, and it defines dominance as the situation in which one company, product, etc. has more power or influence or success than others. This is extremely important, as throughout history, fossil fuels were the best solution we had to our energy needs. The opposition speaking of the future place of fossil fuels in our energy economy, or lack thereof, is not inherently connected to the past and present advantages of fossil fuels, which we will be discussing in our argument specifically. And as we consider the cost of fossil fuel dominance, we must also equally consider the positive effects of the energy source being available to humanity. Our first contention states that fossil fuels were necessary to sustain the population growth and the backbone of modern technology. According to Graham Zabel, a scientist who holds a master's in science for demography and energy economics, the planet could not support the 6 billion plus people that exist today without first the success and commercialization of coal, then of oil, and more recently, gas. These energy sources have been necessary for the unprecedented population growth that has occurred over the last 300 years. Furthermore, fossil fuels have been responsible for technological advancements, the biggest one being electricity. Present day, we still heavily rely on coal to be converted and carry electricity that powers much of our everyday life. The shift from wood burning to fossil fuels was also necessary for the population growth in the 1900s. We simply would not be able to sustain life without them. Finally, fossil fuels have played a huge role in agriculture and access to food. Fossil fuels freed up land to produce food and gave power to farm crops and transport food, relieving some food instability through that. Smill, a professor at University of Manitoba, a historian within interdisciplinary research in the fields of energy, spoke on this, saying, "A wind turbine is a pure expression of fossil fuels." Oil has also had a dramatic effect on large moments in history, including both of the world wars. Our second contention states that renewable sources of energy have their own drawbacks and are not always a clear-cut answer for the future of the global economy. Michael Jacob and Jan Christoph Steckel of the Mercator Research Institute on Global Commons and Climate Change wrote that higher energy costs due to the switch to renewable energy sources will negatively impact the development of third world countries seeking industrialization. Besides affecting a country's aggregate growth performance, higher energy prices could also have impacts on more broadly defined measures of human development, such as poverty and inequality. Then they go on to observe that there is a close correlation between per capita energy consumption and the UNDP's Human Development Index for low-income countries. We argue that it is both harmful and unfair to expect less developed countries to be able to feasibly switch off of fossil fuels. We did the crossfire, right?
Alright. Are y'all ready?
I believe I am.
Ready for the crossfire?
I mean, the point I would like to make first and foremost is that we wouldn't be living till the ripe old age of 80 as a society if it weren't for fossil fuels creating the technology we need to live that long. We would not be able to sustain the huge population growth. When we talk about regret, we have to specifically talk about the past and the present. We can't speak of the future in regret because we can't regret the future. It hasn't happened yet.
While that's fair, we also need to be thinking about how we've been treating our use of these in the past years at the moment. We've been so focused on using these fossil fuels, digging it up from other countries, that we haven't really considered using any other kind of opportunity.
We definitely have considered them. There have been several other different types of energy that have risen up in the past years, in which my other colleagues will present later on. Can you think of an example of where we haven't? Can you cite your sources?
Well, why would we be trying to debate so heavily for climate change action at the moment if we had been trying to act upon it for so long? We've noticed the effects of climate change and how fossil fuels has inherently made it worse for so long, but ultimately there hasn't been much action on it.
You're saying there hasn't been enough of a push to change it. Can you list some alternate sources of energy that we could rely on other than fossil fuels?
We need to be putting research into that. We haven't put nearly enough work into actually trying to develop more resources and trying to find more renewable energy resources that could actually benefit from that.
So since you weren't able to provide any examples, I will list some examples. So wind turbines, solar energy, lithium-ion batteries, is that what it is? Yeah, lithium-ion batteries. Can you think of any other? Like if you're proposing a solution, is that the end? Oh, I was gonna say, if you're proposing a solution, there has to be a solution proposed and an alternate energy source proposed, you know?
This isn't me trying to talk about a solution or a plan.
I was trying to say there's 10 seconds left.
Oh, you were like.
Do y'all want like a minute? I forgot to ask you, do you want like a minute warning?
That'd be helpful.
You did really great.
You're really cool. You did really great. I'm not taking even serious.
Brooklyn, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
I'll wait till we get to you.
Appreciate it.
Of course. I'm not scared. Alright, I'm gonna get.
Alright, my name is Brooklyn Petty, and I will be now doing the line by line followed by disadvantage for the case. So first, the fact that they have the audacity to come up and say that we're not debating about the impacts of climate change here is absolutely ridiculous. That was the whole point of us voting on this resolution to begin with Dr. Lane. So framers' intent, first and foremost, on our casework. As well, with their definition of fossil fuels and the dominance being with the company more power and success, that is inherently a reason to regret this. So extend our fossil fuel economy definition of it being self-sustaining, predicated on the growth and consumption of fossil fuels. Our economy was inherently built on this to feed into it more and more, and that is why we can have to regret it with that. And so, yeah, pretty much with that, extend that and prefer our definition. And we agree it is also a cost-benefit analysis, but we emphasize specifically that this is a claim of value, not policy. We're not trying to provide alternative forms of energy. We are trying to examine the effects that have been seen from the uses of fossil fuels and whether or not we should regret those. Additionally, in regards to the growth for the population and the technology growth and everything, that feeds right back into our definition of fossil fuel economy. We built this to be self-sustaining surrounding fossil fuels. However, I would like to point out that we have known that there are issues with the fossil fuel economy since the 1980s. This is from the USA Today, the conversation in 2022. So Swedish scientists and 1896 calculated that the temperature in the Arctic region would rise 9 or 8 degrees Celsius if carbon dioxide increased by 2.5 or 3 times more. And then Swedish meteorologists agreed, writing in 1901, that the present burning of pit coal is so great that if it continues, it must undoubtedly cause an obvious rise in the means of temperature of the Earth. And in 1912, numerous newspaper articles were released expressing the negative impact of coal and fossil fuels on the climate. The USA we as a society have failed to transition from a dominant fossil fuel economy to a sustainable economy, and as a result, the global temperature has continued to rise at a rapid pace, which forced us into the current standings we are now, a terrifying future. So this isn't just something we are now looking at the effects. We have known the effects and continue to ignore them, and that is what we regret, because we've had the information available to us for regretting it. But additionally, more specific disadvantage would be the uniqueness. The Russia-Ukraine war, the fight for fossil fuel dominance globally, has caused numerous conflicts historically around the world, the most common current one being the Russia-Ukraine war, which has its roots in fossil fuel dependence. This is Level 22. Human-induced climate change in the war on Ukraine has the same roots in fossil fuels and our dependence on them. Whatever is driving Putin and his war machine is fueled by oil and gas. Putin is able to use the oil money to get rid of any domestic political constraints and build a military and war chest to allow these kind of foreign policies. In a way, Russia's fall into this category of the state would include the same as Saddam Hussein's in Iraq. In petro-aggression, it shows that petro-states are countries with economies and federal budgets that rely on oil and gas exports, and they're about 50% more conflict-prone than non-petro states. Also, Putin has had his eyes on Ukraine fossil fuels and has been invading Ukraine for them since 2014. This is COVID-19. If you ask Ukraine's energy minister how long-term economic losses would result in Crimea's annexation, he'll tell you to look towards the sea. Ukraine has lost 80% of its oil and gas deposits in the Black Sea, a significant part of the portion of the infrastructure due to the annexation of Crimea. The Kremlin views these areas as associated hydrocarbon resources and its exclusive war booty. And then finally, the Russia-Ukraine war has escalated to the point of war crimes and genocide. This is Skitsy 22. When we murder innocent civilians who because of who they are, whether it be their religion, their race, or nationality, that is genocide, and that is what Putin is guilty of. It is indisputable that multiple units of Russian militaries have committed mass murder in Ukraine by executing hundreds of civilians in occupied towns. Russian soldiers have also engaged in widespread sexual violence and abduction of municipal leaders and forced deportation of refugees into camps for Russia. So all this is saying is that these fossil fuels inherently lead to conflict when states are run by them, and that results in genocide and war crimes, which is another reason to regret the effects of our dependency on fossil fuels. And so with that, I want to just reiterate once again that our position as the affirmative is we are examining the effects, because if we only look at uses, that doesn't fall in the intent of the framework, because to regret, even with their own definition, is looking back on something, so showing remorse for, and so that inherently reflects to the past, which means the effects. Also, you can extend all of our global warming things that my partner said, and that's my time.
I think we want to use a minute of our prep time.
Okay.
That's a
I'm gonna hold this.
You want me to do the job? You ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Ready? Make it.
My opponents want to bring up the current global conflict between Russia and Ukraine. However, I want to take you back into history during World War I and World War II, where Germany and the Soviet Union were paired and allies. I do want to state, according to Samantha Gross, a fellow in foreign policy program at Brookings University, during World War II, the United States produced nearly 2/3 of the world's oil, and its steady supply was a crucial area to the Allied victory. The British and American natives switched from coal to oil prior to World War I, allowing their ships to go further than coal-fired German ships before refueling. So if we want to talk about global world conflicts, we can go back in time to World War I and World War II, where we have been able to dominate and create a situation in which Germany was not able to overthrow the current standings. And to say that we regret the use of said fossil fuels would mean that we regret the ability to produce such oil and therefore lead to the Allied victory as a result of Germany not being able to keep up with the production. Furthermore, if you want to keep talking about renewable sources as well, I do want to look at Mark Mills at the University of Manhattan. Building wind turbines and solar panels to generate electricity, as well as batteries to fuel electric vehicles, requires, on average, more than 10 times the quantity of materials compared with building machines using hydrocarbons. And the blades on a single wind turbine have more plastic than 5 million smartphones. Furthermore, worn out solar panels, much of it non-recyclable, will constitute double the tonnage of today's global plastic waste, with over 3 million tons per year of unrecyclable plastics. 10 million tons per year of batteries will become garbage as well. Oil, natural gas, and coal are needed to produce items like concrete, steel, plastics, and purified minerals, which are used to build the green machines. The energy and my opponents want to think about the overall global standing as for economic countries. Research has shown from a research firm in Berlin, higher energy prices could also have impacts on more broadly defined measures of human development, such as poverty and inequality. It is shown that underdeveloped countries are currently using energy and electricity through fossil fuels to better their country and develop. Also, relating to that and poverty and going back in time as well, a lot of the reason why we shifted to fossil fuels was because simply we could not sustain the amount of people that grew in that were growing without the shift to fossil fuels. Oil provides the energy needed to grow and distribute food and to increase the nutritional content of agricultural produce. This also stimulates mortality decline by getting food to people that need it, alleviating local food shortages, flying food aid to drought-stricken regions, and shipping grain to countries whose population have grown larger than their output of food. Prior to this, they were burning wood, which releases an emission of 3.5% more of carbon emissions than fossil fuels. And it also freed up more land and agriculture to have livestock and to give back. And instead of cutting down trees, they were using that area to replant and or grow other crops.
That was your turn? Cool. Okay, you ready for the crossfire?
Yes, ma'am.
Cool. Ready on it?
Mhm.
You want me to begin?
So
Currently,
they have the first question. They have the first question. Okay, then so basically your whole argument against the Russia-Ukraine conflict is that it's ignored because in the past with like World War II it was beneficial.
No, I'm saying that if you want to compare apples to apples, that we also have to look at prior historical context. If we want to say that we regret the overall dominance, we were able to use the dominance of fossil fuels to win the victory for the Allied.
But how does that
forces.
negate the genocide that's currently
Were
happening?
you doing a cost-benefit analysis? Are we comparing the Holocaust to the Ukraine situation right now?
No. because we brought up Ukraine being inherently tied to fossil fuels, and you just brought up the use of fossil fuels. This war was created and born out of the want of fossil fuels. World War II does not stem from that as a source.
But to say that we regret the dominance of that would to say that we regret the use that allowed us to win World War II against the Soviet Union, including Russia and Germany.
Okay, good question.
What other alternatives do you have to the waste that is provided? Like, how is that we, one, have to use fossil fuels to produce these green energy resources, and also electricity.
So you're wanting me to provide an alternative source?
I'm saying where are the cost-benefit analysis, and where does that lie with also the unrecyclable materials that come out of using green?
We're not proposing the policy, we're not proposing alternatives. We are simply examining the effects because regret has remorse tied to it, and so that is looking back on something that is feeling sorrow for. Therefore, we don't have to provide an alternative. We're simply like doing a cost-benefit analysis of the effects.
So you wanted to give the cost-benefit of analysis although it is stated by 2030 more than 10 million tons per year of battery.
How much prep do you want? We'll go for a minute of prep.
That's a minute.
So reason for Ukraine. That's what you put the banner bit on. And then you can
You ready?
read your card. Or do you want more prep time? Because I'm good.
Okay, that'll be fine.
Okay. Got this.
Okay.
You may begin.
Alright, since I didn't introduce myself for the first speech, my name's Zachary Hart. Might as well get that out of the way. So, I want to try and emphasize one of the points that they try to make, that World War II ended up needing to use fossil fuels to win the war. But they were not the main driving force for that said war. Ukraine and Russia, that's still currently going on, was caused directly by the use of fossil fuels. World War II was not, so ultimately the fact that they were used in World War II is kind of ultimately irrelevant. There's the fact that the main driving force for the current Ukraine and Russia war right now is driven by fossil fuels is far more important than the general use of them in the wars prior. They have a negative effect that is being seen all across the world right now. While we've mentioned Ukraine and Russia being driven by fossil fuels, there's also been conflicts over fossil fuels in Africa too. According to the Huffington Post in 2016, the Niger Delta's legendary blood oil disaster has been persisting for almost a decade at this point. Oil in the Delta fuels a dangerous mix of environmental devastation, a violent militancy that has killed thousands, human rights abuses, corporate greed, and exploitation, poverty, and despair. It's time to put an end to this ongoing atrocity. Despite billions of dollars earned from oil, the region's 30 million residents, mostly fishermen and farmers, remain some of the most impoverished people in the world. They eat oil-contaminated food, drink toxic water, breathe polluted air, and are chronically unhealthy. Along with environmental devastation, the lack of financial benefit from local people has fueled a violent militancy over the past 2 decades, killing thousands, destabilizing the region, and preventing sustainable development. The blood oil business model is simple. Produce as much oil as quickly and as cheaply as possible, exploit inadequate government oversight, cut corners on safety, ignore or blame others for oil theft, spills, and violence, pay bribes to the government, military, and police when necessary, and continue making huge profits as long as possible. As the government is a majority owner of oil projects and relies on oil for most of its revenue there, it habitually turns a blind eye to the ongoing crisis. Today, people still see little hope of breaking the spiral of poverty, environmental destruction, and violence. The government, oil companies, and military are simply making too much money from the current madness to want to fix the crisis. If you want to say that we don't regret the effects of fossil fuels, that means you to turn a blind eye to all of the negative effects, the violence, the genocide that it has ultimately caused. It might have possibly won us wars in the past, but that does not mean that it just automatically justifies all of the death that it has also caused. It is still an ongoing problem. It has grown even more exponentially worse over the past few years, and we've just ignored it. We can't just continue to ignore the effects, simply saying, oh, it's helped us in the past, so it must be fine. It is killing people. It is killing people all across the world. Even if it potentially helps people develop themselves further, it is just as likely to kill them in the process as it might also help them. We need to be seeing the negative effects that happen here. That's it? Okay.
We're gonna go ahead and use our other minute prep time.
That's a bit.
Oh, I thought we prepared for crossfire.
Too
jumpy.
Alright, everyone, my name is Jay Sprawley, and I would like to first talk about the fact that the affirmative keeps pushing that the Russian-Ukrainian conflict is primarily driven by fossil fuel deposits, when the annexation of Crimea was 8 years ago and has no place in this current war. Now, if we want to talk about Africa and we talk about the blood oil situation there, I don't believe that situation is a focus because of fossil fuels. That situation would happen with any resource. In fact, we see in the Democratic of Congo, there are 40,000 child slaves used to harvest lithium for lithium-ion batteries used for renewables. This is not an issue with fossil fuels in the area. It is an issue with the governments in place already. Now, with these effects, making energy costs higher, which is the cost of doing renewables in the first place, will lead to lower development in these countries, much lower economic development. In fact, Jacob Michael and Jan-Christoph Steckel wrote for the Mercator Institute that countries that have been the most successful in reducing poverty have also witnessed the largest increases in per capita energy use. This is just straight up a fact. In fact, in the year 2009, 1.4, sorry, that was the wrong one. Yeah. For instance, numerous studies have and identified a close correlation between per capita energy consumption and the UNDP's Human Development Index for low-income countries. This is not an issue with fossil fuels in particular. These issues would happen with any resource, and I feel like the benefits from fossil fuels in placing our economy, like through the Industrial Revolution, aspects like that, switching from the majority of the world living in serfdom on feudalist castles to eventually moving to lower levels of poverty, lower levels of food instability. This was only possible through fossil fuels in the first place. We did not have the technology back then to do this. I don't think we can regret the use that we did then that has led to us have the possibilities now. We can only do renewables in the current day because we did that back then. In fact, going back to what one of my teammates said, coal was the better alternative in the time to wood. Wood did end up with more carbon emissions than coal did at the time. That was the better alternative we had. Now, it's very easy to say, yeah, we regret all these costs that have happened, but there was no other way to do it at the time. These are the benefits we have reaped from this, and I think they outweigh the costs. I'd like to take the time.
You ready to classify? You sure?
This is the grant.
Yes.
Yep.
It's a grant.
We all stand up for this.
See,
feel like we
see how
should.
fast that went? Wait, that's
Crazy.
Alright. Got this. It's almost over.
Yes.
Remember, please be respectful of the crossfire.
No promises.
Would you like the first question?
Yes, I think that's agreeable. I have something to bring up. Do you guys have something to bring up, or do you want me to go?
I have something.
Okay, I just want to bring up the very fact that, like, we would not be able to get and harness our renewable resources without fossil fuels. We could not get wind turbines, we could not get solar power, and we would be living in the dark ages right now. We would not have the technology we need to keep things alive. And I just want to bring up that, yeah, like, the gross misrepresentation of the war in Ukraine right now, it's not because of fossil fuels exclusively. I don't even think that's the major reason. It's Putin trying to reclaim Ukraine as part of the Soviet Union. That is not due to the fossil fuels.
Okay, so to answer, I guess, your first point, is that we've actually known that being reliant on fossil fuels since the 1800s was a problem, and we have not moved to be more sustainable since then. We are so reliant on fossil fuels to produce those renewable resources now because we have not taken steps over 100 years ago. In addition to the Ukraine and Russia thing, it is exactly Putin's motives for annexing Crimea was specifically to gain access to the Black Sea. That was actually our Cohen 19 card talks specifically that Russia annexed Crimea for the purposes of getting more oil, so it is a fossil fuel based and born conflict.
Alright, do you all want to bring
I
up?
just want to point out that there are little, as Jay stated, there were little alternatives in the time that we switched to fossil fuels to produce the amount of electricity and energy that we needed to. Saying that we regret doing so is saying that we wish that they didn't, but they also have no other alternatives, so they can just keep burning wood, which would lead to more carbon emissions today. And I also want to point out...
Hold on, first let me address your first point that you made. So, in regards to that, there were our so-called no other alternatives at the time because we didn't bother to explore them because we were so wrapped up in sustaining the fossil fuel economy we were starting. So we didn't start to look into other resources, and that's why we're so behind on our other
We also
options.
we were focused on the fossil fuel because we needed it at the time. Otherwise, we wanted to talk about like the human repercussions of this. During the time that we switched to fossil fuels and were using them as our primary resource at the very beginning, that was due to a lot of food instability, population boom. So therefore, without focusing on that, many more people would die. Access to food would be less sustainable than
We
it was
agree
then.
at the time they were a great
So
option.
therefore, saying to
However,
regret that,
we
to
should have
regret
been
in
looking
the
at
past.
other alternative sources as well.
You can ask a question now. We've asked plenty of questions.
Thank you. Do you have one?
No, I don't really have one yet.
So mine was specifically into like the population sustainability. How do you continue to claim that as an impact if the world is no longer sustainable for the population? It's not a matter of like human issues, the world will not sustain our population. Sorry. Do you want them to answer or no?
I think we can maybe answer it in our conclusion, which I'm about to do.
Okay, cool. That works for me. No, you're good. Yeah, we'll use our last minute prep. Okay.
I totally.
I said, so how do we keep claiming that, how do we keep claiming that our population isn't the sustainable best excuse to not withdraw alternatives? Is that what
No.
But we just talked about it in the course, 2 seconds ago.
They haven't
Ask her what the question was at the end of the
said anything in relation to the, trying to dispute.
Just do it. Just do it.
What was your question again?
So we can answer it. I'll answer not during my prep.
Okay, valid. I'm pretty sure it's how do you, pretty sure it's just how do we keep claiming the expanse of human population as an excuse to not look into alternative energy sources? And I can answer that if that is the question. I'm just gonna bring up this. I don't think this is new information.
Cool. So the question I asked at the end is how are you continuing to claim sustainability as an impact without, I was just trying to time? I was just trying to answer the
Wait,
question.
what is this the conclusion?
Because they asked me for the question.
Yeah.
Who's your last speaker?
Me.
Okay.
So they wanted the question from the end of the prep. So I was
It's
telling
okay if you're not allowed to give it to us.
Just give it to him.
Okay. Sustainability is an impact when the world is no longer sustaining the population.
And your time can start now.
Cool. So first I'll go some more by the line by line. So the annexation of Crimea literally happened because Putin was after the resources. That was our, hold on, Labelle 22 card, and then supported further by COA19, which talked about how 80% of Ukraine's fossil fuels were lost after Russia annexed Crimea. This war is literally centered around the idea of a need for fossil fuels and a greed for that, which was born into more conflicts and created further genocide. And it's not irrelevant that they annexed them like 8 years ago. The problem is that happened that long ago, and it's progressed to this point. It's only showing how much further it goes, and whenever fossil fuels are a dependency and we become greedy over them. As well, with our Niger card, we're talking about how this is not unique because it can happen with other resources as well, and that if energy costs increase, it will cause decreases in economic development. But Niger has an economy worth billions of dollars, and they are literally some of the poorest individuals in the world. That was in our Guardian 22 card, about how they are living in poverty. They're living in some of the worst conditions possible. Even though they have $1 billion economy, they don't see any of it because all the other global superpowers just take from them and take from them because they're sustaining their fossil fuel economy. That is the issue, and that is something that we should feel terrible for. Absolutely remorseful for at that point. And then finally, I would like to reiterate our framework. So again, we're not proposing an alternative policy. We are examining the effects and weighing those out. So we both agree that regret means remorse, and then that entails reflection, which would mean looking at the effects and then weighing those. So we're looking at essentially the effects that they have, positive effects they've claimed is like technological development as well as population and sustainability with a growing population. However, our effects and impacts are the effects of global warming, that the world will literally not be livable within the next 3 years if we increase more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, which was our last card in the affirmative case. So are we really going to continue to be like, but we were able to grow to this population, but we can't sustain anymore because the world has chosen not to, because we've destroyed it. We've destroyed the place of habitation to begin with. They cannot have that impact in today's round. Additionally, with the technological developments, that goes in the same thing. How are you going to value technological developments whenever you're not going to be able to even live to see them? You're not going to be able to live to continue to appreciate those technological developments if we don't regret the effects of fossil fuels because it's gotten us to this point. So we regret not taking action sooner. Again, we talked about how we've known this is a problem since the late 1800s, and we didn't do research or try to diversify our energy sources. We just fed into that fossil fuel economy, and we do regret that because now we are so far behind in renewable resource options. We are the only side in today's realm that is actively advocating against imminent human extinction and also upholding human rights in regards to the genocide that we regret happening currently based out of a fossil fuel-born conflict, not fossil fuels being used within a conflict. The negative is charging towards human extinction, full fossil fuels ahead. And a vote for the affirmative stands with human rights and having a world to continue to live in today. I'll relinquish the rest of my time.
Are y'all ready to close this out?
That we are.
Alright, you ready to begin?
We would not be here today in the same capacity if it weren't for the use of fossil fuels. To say that we regret the dominance would be to say that we regret the success and advancements made using fossil fuels. Therefore, we cannot regret the history of use and reliance on the energy that we've created with it. We have to consider the full historical context for fossil fuels use energy, like energy reserves, agricultural sustainability, and everything else that has supported the population growth throughout time. Look at how far we've come. Looking at how far we've come will help us move forward into the future, gradually away from fossil fuels, while we work on our limited supply to the infinite supply of energy. Relying on fossil fuels will only allow us to move along to other possibilities of energy use in the future. As we stated earlier, a wind turbine is a pure expression of fossil fuels. The benefit of fossil fuels has allowed us to advance not only as an American economy, but globally. It is also difficult to state that we regret, as fossil fuels were vital to the general growth of our population as it grew over time. Fossil fuels have been used to develop the technology to switch to green sources, and we cannot ignore that. As we said earlier, this is a quote that we brought up earlier, the planet could not support the 6 billion plus people that exist today without first the success and commercialization of coal, and then of oil, and then recently gas. These energy sources have been necessary for the unprecedented population growth that has occurred over the last 300 years. And I want to answer what you brought up in the Grand Crossfire. You said, how can we keep claiming that sustainability is an impact historically when the world is no longer sustaining population where we are now? We got to talk about the real problem here. The energy sources have been co-opted, have been, as you said, greedily gone after, and greed has been the main source of why we're having so many problems. Our energy sources have not been adequately distributed throughout the world to help everybody equally. They've been hoarded by 1% people, by Putin, by greedy rich white men deciding our fate for us. And we can't perpetuate climate doom by saying there's not going to be a world left to change things, so screw you guys. We have to consider where we're going to go next and how we're going to transition away from fossil fuels to more sustainable energy. I do bring up the fact that fossil fuels has had a variety of negative impacts in the past, but as we search for more energy uses, we're running into the same problems, like children being used as slaves in the Congo to mine lithium-ion batteries. That's pretty awful. We need to change our infrastructure and not just blame the actual source of energy itself, and look at where and how we're distributing our energy. And I will relinquish the rest of my time. Whew,
It's over.
Y'all did great. You're really amazing. I'm sorry I yelled. I hate fossil fuels.
Don't we all hate fossil fuels? Alright, let me stop this.
I actually believe